He stood at the head of the table with a glass of good scotch in his hand, and he looked at Adelaide Crane the way men like him always looked at women like her, like she was something that had blown in off the road and landed on his good carpet. "Is this the one?" Leonard Ashby said. Not to Adelaide, to his son. Cormac didn't answer right away. He set his fork down very carefully, the way he did when he was choosing his next words. Adelaide had learned to read that pause in the 14 months she had known him. It meant he was deciding how much of the truth to tell. "Adelaide works at the library," Cormac said. "In Pinecrest." "I know where Pinecrest is," his father said. The dining room at the Ashby house was the kind of room that made you conscious of your hands. Dark walnut table, long enough to seat 12. Crystal glasses that caught the light from a chandelier Adelaide couldn't have afforded to insure. She had worn her best dress, a navy wool shift she'd bought on sale 2 winters ago, and she could feel how wrong it was in this room without anyone saying a word about it. Cormac's mother, Patricia, sat at the far end of the table with the careful stillness of a woman who had learned to be invisible in her own home. She had smiled at Adelaide when they arrived, a real smile, the kind that uses the eyes. That was the only warmth in the room. "A librarian," Leonard said, pulling out his chair. He sat down with the deliberateness of a man who owned the furniture. "Cormac, you've been at the firm for 6 years. You make what you make. And you bring home a librarian from Pinecrest, Dad. I'm making conversation." He wasn't. Adelaide knew that. She picked up her water glass and held it with both hands, not drinking, just having something to hold. Across the table, Cormac's younger sister Bridget was watching the whole thing with the bright, uncomfortable attention of someone who had seen this before and was glad, for once, it wasn't directed at her. "How long have you two been seeing each other?" Leonard asked, looking at Adelaide directly for the first time. "About a year," she said. "And before that, where did you grow up?" "Pinecrest," she said. "I've always been in Pinecrest." Something flickered across Leonard Ashby's face, a kind of satisfaction, the quiet, ugly kind. "Of course you have," he said, and turned to the soup. Cormac reached under the table and found her hand. His fingers were warm. She let him hold on. Adelaide's mother had told her once that the sort a person could do was want something badly enough to show it. "People can smell need," she'd said, "and the ones who would use it against you always smell it first." Her mother had been talking about job interviews, but Adelaide had filed it away as a general truth, the kind that keeps finding new applications. She had not, she told herself, needed Cormac Ashby. She had met him at the library on a Tuesday, which was not a romantic beginning. He'd come in looking for a book on municipal planning law, which was not a romantic subject. He had asked for her help. She had found what he needed, and then he had lingered at the desk asking questions about the collection, about Pinecrest, about whether she liked working there. She'd thought he was just being polite. She'd grown up in a town where people were polite to librarians the way they were polite to anyone in a service position, genuinely, for the most part, but not as an overture. He'd come back the following Tuesday, and the one after that. By January, they were having dinner at the small Italian place on McDonald Street that Adelaide had been going to since university, and Cormac was saying that he'd never met anyone who read the way she did, who thought the way she did, and she was telling herself not to believe it too fast, not to let it change the way she stood in her own kitchen. But it had. Gradually, then completely. She had grown up the daughter of Rosemary Crane, who worked the front desk at a motel on the highway for 22 years, and Douglas Crane, who had driven a propane delivery truck until his knees gave out. Good people. Honest people. The kind of people who fixed what broke in the house themselves because calling someone was an expense, and who celebrated Christmas carefully, choosing gifts that were meaningful but not excessive, because excess had never been something they could afford to practice. Adelaide had grown up understanding the exact distance between having enough and not having enough, the way you understand the edge of a step in the dark, by feel, by the slight change in the floor beneath you. The Ashbys were not like that. The Ashbys were the kind of family that had a house in Muskoka, a real house, not a cottage in the way people said cottage to be modest, a house on a lake with a dock and a boathouse, and a kitchen with a stone floor imported from somewhere. She had not been to the Muskoka house. She had only heard about it. But sitting in that dining room in November, watching Leonard Ashby look at her like a man assessing inventory, she felt the weight of it. The whole invisible structure of what the Ashbys had and what she didn't, pressing down on the table between them like something no one was going to acknowledge out loud. After dinner, Leonard asked Cormac to come see something in his study. It was the kind of request that won a request. Patricia began to clear the plates and Adelaide stood to help because she didn't know what else to do with herself. "You don't have to," Patricia said. "I want to," Adelaide said, which was true. They worked quietly for a moment, moving between the table and the kitchen. The kitchen was warm, smelling of the roast that had been resting on the counter, and Adelaide felt something ease slightly in her chest. "He's not always like that," Patricia said, not looking at her. Adelaide didn't know what to say to that, so she said, "The roast was wonderful." Patricia glanced at her then, a sideways look. "It was, wasn't it?" A pause. "Cormac talks about you. He talks about you a lot, actually. More than he's ever talked about anyone." Adelaide set a plate carefully in the sink. "He's talked about you too, about how you used to drive him to hockey at 5 in the morning." Something crossed Patricia's face. Old love, the kind that's become structural. 4:30 sometimes, she said. He was very serious about it. She handed Adelaide a serving dish. "He's serious about you." "I know," Adelaide said. And she did know. That was the thing she held on to, walking back through that dining room, past the chandelier, back to the chair where she had sat for 2 hours being quietly assessed and found wanting. She knew it. It didn't make the rest of it smaller. But it made it bearable. 3 weeks later, Cormac told her what his father had said in the study. They were in her apartment, the small one above the hardware store on Birch Street, with the windows that let in the cold and the radiator that knocked all night. She had made tea. He was sitting at her kitchen table the way he always sat there, too large for the chair, comfortable anyway. He said he had concerns, Cormac said, about me, about the match. That's how he put it, the match. He said the word like it tasted of something old and sour. He said he had worked his whole life to build something, and he had to think about what that something was going to look like going forward. Adelaide wrapped her hands around her mug. "And what did you say?" "I said that what he had built was a commercial real estate portfolio and a reputation for being the smartest man in any room he walked into, and that I didn't think either of those things had very much to do with who I spent my life with." She looked at him. He didn't like that, Cormac added. "No, I wouldn't think so." He reached across the table, his hand over hers. "I need you to know that I don't care what he thinks. I want you to know that. Not as a reassurance, as a fact." Adelaide looked at his hand on hers, at the grain of her kitchen table, which she'd found at a garage sale in Barrie and sanded herself, at the mug with the chipped handle she'd never gotten around to replacing, at all the small particular things that made up her life, this life, that she had built slowly and carefully with what she had. "I know," she said again, "but he's your father." "He's my father," Cormac agreed. "He's not my architect." The thing about Leonard Ashby, and Adelaide came to understand this gradually, the way you understand a complicated piece of machinery by watching it run long enough, was that he operated through other people. He did not generally say the damaging thing himself. He arranged for it to be said. At Christmas there was a gathering at the Ashby house. Extended family, business associates, a couple of neighbors. Adelaide came with Cormac and wore the same navy dress and told herself it was a good dress, which it was, and that it didn't matter, which it also was, mostly. Leonard's brother Frank was there with his wife Diane. Diane was the kind of woman who asked questions that weren't questions, who wrapped an assessment in the grammatical structure of curiosity. She found Adelaide by the fireplace within 20 minutes of arrival. "So you're at the library," Diane said. "Do you love it?" "I do," Adelaide said. "That's wonderful. I always think it takes a certain kind of person to be really happy in a role like that. A person who isn't, driven, I suppose, in a particular direction, who can find contentment in something quieter." She smiled. "That's a gift, really." Adelaide looked at her. "I'm also finishing a graduate degree," she said, "in archival studies. I'm building a digitization program for the municipal records going back to 1871. It's actually fairly complex work." Diane's smile thinned very slightly. "How interesting," she said, and moved toward the drinks table. Later, across the room, Adelaide caught Leonard watching that exchange. He looked away when her eyes met his, but not before she'd seen it. A flicker of something recalculated. She didn't say anything to Cormac about it that night. She filed it. She was good at filing. It was Bridget who told her what was really happening. Bridget Ashby, 26, worked in communications at a hospital downtown, and had survived her father's household by developing a very accurate radar for the difference between what was being said and what was being meant. She and Adelaide had gotten coffee twice by then, just the two of them, and Adelaide liked her in the uncomplicated way you like someone who is honest about the room they grew up in. They met at a place on Queen Street in February. Outside, the city was doing the particular thing it does in February, which is to say it was gray and relentless and smelling faintly of road salt. "I want to tell you something," Bridget said, "and I want to say first that I'm telling you because I think you're good for him, and I don't want this to work the way Dad wants it to work." Adelaide put down her cup. "He's been talking to Meredith Holloway," Bridget said, the daughter. "She and Cormac went out twice in law school, nothing serious, but the families have known each other for 20 years. Dad had lunch with Meredith's father in January. She stopped. He's been creating opportunity. That's what he does. He doesn't push. He just creates opportunity and waits." Adelaide sat with that for a moment. The radiator in the coffee shop ticked. Somewhere near the back, someone was steaming milk. "Does Cormac know?" she asked. "Cormac suspects. He doesn't know the specifics." Bridget looked at her directly. "I don't think Dad understands yet what he's actually dealing with. He thinks you're someone who can be moved around, who'll eventually get tired or feel out of place and step back on her own, so he won't have to do anything dramatic." A pause. "I think he's wrong about that." Adelaide considered this carefully. "How do you know?" Bridget almost smiled. "Because you didn't flinch once when Diane did that thing at Christmas." "Not once. I was watching." Adelaide did not tell Cormac about the conversation with Bridget. Not yet. What she did instead was think. She had spent her adult life in the Pinecrest Public Library, which was not a grand institution. It was a mid-sized municipal library with a good children's section and a local history collection that had been neglected for 30 years. The neglect was why she was there. When she'd applied for the position 3 years ago, the job posting had mentioned digitization, almost as an afterthought, and she had written her application entirely around that afterthought, because she had seen what was in those boxes, in those filing cabinets, in that backroom that smelled of old paper and mildew. Township records from 1871, survey maps, land grants, birth registrations, correspondence between the first municipal clerk and the provincial government that nobody had read in 100 years. She had spent 3 years building a database, cross-referencing, photographing documents with a setup she had largely sourced herself, grant writing for better equipment, corresponding with provincial archivists, creating a system that could actually be used. The university program had been her own initiative, paying for it herself, because the credential would let her formalize what she was already doing and push for a proper budget. She was not, it had to be said, someone who was easy to move around. In March, Leonard Ashby made his move. It was not subtle, which surprised her a little. She had expected something more oblique, but perhaps he had decided oblique wasn't working, or perhaps he had simply underestimated how much Cormac would tell her. He invited her to lunch, alone, at a restaurant in the financial district, the kind of place where the tables are far enough apart that no one can overhear. She went. Leonard was already seated when she arrived. He stood when she came to the table, which was a courtesy she hadn't expected. He asked how her drive had been. He ordered water and said the salmon was good here. They talked about nothing for 12 minutes. Adelaide let him. She was comfortable with silence, had always been, the way people who work with old documents become comfortable with patience. Then he put down his water glass and said, "I want to talk to you honestly." "All right," she said. "Cormac is my son. I have spent 30 years building a life that gives him options I didn't have. I'm not going to apologize for wanting to protect that." "I wouldn't expect you to," she said. He looked at her. He had expected, she thought, more resistance at this point. "What I'm trying to tell you," he said carefully, "is that Cormac has a future that requires a certain kind of partnership, his work, his reputation, the relationships that come with his family. It's a particular world." "And I'm not from it," she said. "You're not from it," he agreed. Adelaide folded her hands on the table. She thought of the boxes in the back room at the library, the survey maps, the cramped handwriting of men who had been dead for 150 years trying to describe land they were measuring for the first time. She thought of her mother at the motel front desk. She thought of Cormac at her kitchen table, too large for the chair, saying he's not my architect. "Mr. Ashby," she said, Do you know what's in the municipal records for Pinecrest Township from 1871 to 1920? He blinked. I don't see what. There are land grants in there, she said. Original Crown grants, before the surveys were regularized. Some of them were recorded incorrectly when the province transferred them to the municipal registry in the 1890s. Errors in legal descriptions, parcel boundaries. I found 11 of them. 4 are under active commercial development right now. 2 of those are in Ashby Properties' portfolio. The room got very quiet. I'm not saying this as a threat, Adelaide said, because she needed to be clear about that. I'm saying it because I think you've made an assumption about what I am. You think I'm someone who drifted into Cormac's life and will drift out again when it becomes inconvenient. I want you to understand that I'm someone who spent 3 years reading 150 years of property records by hand, and who knows exactly what she found. Leonard Ashby was very still. I've already corresponded with the provincial archives about the methodology for correction, she said. The right process is straightforward, amended filings, no drama. I haven't done anything with the findings yet, because I wanted to finish the full review first. I expect to complete it by June. She picked up her water glass. I'd suggest you have your title team pull the original Crown grants for parcels 7, 12, and 19 in the 3rd concession. Sooner rather than later. She let that sit. Outside the restaurant's tall windows, Bay Street moved in its ordinary winter way. People in dark coats walking fast, a delivery truck idling at the curb. I'm not your enemy, she said finally. I'm the woman your son loves. Those are the facts as I understand them. Leonard Ashby looked at her for a long time. And then slowly he did something she had not anticipated. He laughed. Not a loud laugh. A quiet one, the kind that happens when something surprises a man who is rarely surprised. He did say you were smart, Leonard said. He did, several times. He picked up his menu. The salmon is actually very good, she told Cormac that evening. All of it. The records, the land grants, the lunch. She sat across from him at her kitchen table and told him everything in order. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You found 11 errors in the Crown grants, he said. 11, yes, and you just carried that around for 3 years. I was doing a full review. I didn't want to flag anything until I had the whole picture. He rubbed his face with both hands. She couldn't tell if he was going to laugh or say something serious, and she watched him, waiting. Adelaide, he said. Yes. I need to ask you something. Okay, will you marry me? She looked at him. The kitchen table between them, the chipped mug, the radiator starting up its knock against the pipes, the particular January light coming through the window above the sink, pale and honest and very northern. That's the question you're leading with, she said. It's the one I've been sitting on for 2 months, he said. I was waiting for the right moment. This seems like the right moment. Outside on Birch Street, a truck went by, and the window rattled in its frame, and the radiator knocked once more and went quiet. Yes, Adelaide said, obviously yes. The wedding was in September, at a small stone church outside Pinecrest, that Adelaide had driven past her whole life. Patricia cried, which Adelaide had expected. Bridget was a bridesmaid, which Adelaide had asked for, and meant. Cormac's colleagues came, and were politely bewildered by Pinecrest, which was fine. Leonard Ashby walked the perimeter of the reception with a glass of wine in his hand, and at one point, during the evening, found his way to where Adelaide was standing, with her mother near the cake table. He had met Adelaide Crane exactly once before, briefly, at an Easter gathering. He shook her hand now and said that he understood she'd managed the front desk at the Pinecrest Motor Inn for more than 2 decades. 23 years, Rosemary said. That's a long time, Leonard said. I've been told you're the reason half the town still knows how to deal with difficult customers. Rosemary looked at him with the particular directness of a woman who had spent 23 years at a motel front desk and was not impressed by square footage. Someone has to, she said. Leonard Ashby almost smiled. It was, Adelaide thought, watching them, the closest she had ever seen him come to admitting he had been wrong about something, without actually saying so. The amended filings for parcels 7, 12, and 19 went through in August, 6 weeks before the wedding. Leonard's title team had handled it quietly and correctly. Adelaide had consulted on the documentation. They had not spoken about it directly, either of them. But it had been done properly, which was all she had ever wanted. She had been asked, more than once in the months after the lunch, whether she had said what she'd said in that restaurant as a power move, a strategy. Whether she had planned it, She hadn't. She had gone to that lunch because Leonard had asked her honestly, and she respected honesty, even when it came wrapped in condescension. She had said what she'd said because it was true, because it was relevant, and because she had learned. From her mother, from 23 years, watching a woman handle difficult people at a front desk, from 3 years in a backroom with a century and a half of records, that the most powerful thing a person can do is simply tell the truth about what they know. The land doesn't lie, the records don't lie, and neither Adelaide Crane had decided long ago, did she? She stood in the September light, in the dress she had chosen carefully and loved completely, with her husband beside her and her mother laughing at something Leonard Ashby had just said, and she felt, not triumph exactly, but something quieter and more durable than triumph. The particular satisfaction of a person who knows what they're worth and waited, without flinching, for the world to catch up.